I'm gonna go ahead and sit in my new chair. Oh yeah, let's talk about building this chunky chair. Spring is on the horizon and I wanted some new patio chairs. So in this video, I'm gonna show you how I built this really cute and comfortable chunky chair. I tried to keep this really simple so that everybody could feel empowered in order to tackle their own seating this spring. So let's go ahead and jump into how I built. I did this project off by flipping out the wings on my miter saw and cutting my material down to size. I do have a set of plans with dimensions, a shopping list, and a cut list on my website if you'd like to build your own. I chose to build my chair from 4x4 cedar, which is beautiful, but it does come rough. Instead of sanding, I used my jointer and planer to get my material smooth. I also took some thickness off the stock material, as I thought the 4x4 chunk was a tad too chunky. However, if you don't have a planer, know that you can leave it as its stock thickness. After milling my boards, I go back to the miter to cut my boards down to their final dimensions needed. Now we're ready for the table saw. Most of the parts on this chair are very straightforward. However, there is one part that needs a bevel, and I wanted to give you a tip for setting that up. I used that WD-40 dry lube on my saw blade here and also my tabletop. Now my blade is already at the bevel degree needed, but I wanted the top of my board to remain the full width, which could be tricky to set up the fence for. I use my material to align a tooth to the very top of my board. It doesn't matter which tooth, but whichever one you use as a reference for the height, you must use for the reference to measure to the fence. I move the fence into place and measure over to the width of the board. Now I can push my board through and get this bevel without taking any material off the top. Now moving over to the leg parts, which also need a bevel at the base in order to create a built-in foot, if you will. Let's say you want a 1-inch high bevel. You can align a tooth to 1 inch. Then, as long as you use that same tooth to measure over to the fence and set it for the width of the material, it'll come out correctly. Now, these leg parts can be tricky to run through a table saw because of their height. You can get into a dangerous kickback situation if you don't keep the board supported. So I cut down a scrap to create a taller push stick to help support the leg and keep it at a 90 as it moves through the blade. That should be all the tips needed for cutting down the parts. Now we can start on assembly. I'm going to be starting with joining what will be the leg arm assembly. And since I'm dyslexic, I always lay out my parts first to make sure it looks right. I also use this time to mark off where my screws need to go. This project is going to be put together with butt joints using 5-inch long Spax power lags. I've been using these a lot in my construction projects and love the head that doubles as a washer. After lining out the placement, I use a Forstner bit at the drill press that is just slightly larger than the head of my Spax. Once they're all drilled, I get clamps and glue ready to start putting parts together. Since this is a patio chair that's going to be outside, I'm using the exterior rated wood glue Weldwood by DAP. After applying some glue to each end, I use clamps to hold the parts together, making sure that they're aligned properly, and then pin them together using those lags. Nice. Next, I'm going to show you how to plug these holes, which will hide the screws completely. But remember, an even simpler way to build this chair is to leave the screw heads exposed. They do come in black. They make special drill bits called plug cutter bits, and they come in a range of different sizes. I chose the correct size, then used an offcut to make the needed amount of plugs. Note here, you can either use the exact same material or use a contrasting material to make these more of a feature rather than trying to hide them. To get them out, you can take it over to a bandsaw, set the fence so that the blade will cut them free as you push your material through. I've personally always thought this was so satisfying to do. Next, it is as simple as popping these plugs into the holes. I again apply some exterior wood glue here, and I'm also making sure I'm lining up the grain of the plug to the grain of the arm. Or I guess this is the leg. I use a mallet to press it in, and then after letting the glue dry for about 15 minutes, I cut off the excess and sand it flush. Now don't be afraid to move the part around as you're working in order to make whatever task you're working on easier. You'll see that I move from my workbench to the ground up to a bench vise. These can now be set aside for the meantime while we move on to building out the seat and back assembly. I start off by doing the same routine as far as grabbing the parts needed for this and then laying them out. When everything looks as it should, I apply wood glue and screw things together. Here I switch to the Spax deck screws, but I'm using the stainless steel since this is going outside. I again move this down to the ground when working on the back stretcher so that I could be working with gravity. But now let's move it back up to the workbench and put on the seat slats. I applied a little wood glue, laid out the slats. Then for attaching these, I'm using my 15 gauge Senko. Now, if you're new to woodworking, I know that I only had an 18 gauge when starting out, so feel free to use that if you don't have a 15 gauge. Honestly, the slats are nestled in a rabbet, so it doesn't need much, and there's also wood glue there. And there you are, a completed seat. Nice. Let's go ahead and set that aside for a second and repeat almost the same for the back. Here though, I'm only going to attach the first 2 slats, again using wood glue and my nailer. For joining it together, I found it easiest to leave the seat on the ground and then bring over the back assembly to it. I applied some wood glue and then used some screws to join them together. Let me pull back up the legs on the workbench and make a few marks that will help me align the seat back to the legs. A tape measure is great, but I've really been enjoying utilizing a combination square on these furniture projects. Since I want the seat and back to be tilted, my front mark and my back mark are at 2 different heights. In this way, I can now set the seat back into place and simply align the front to its mark and the back to its. Oh, actually, I almost forgot to round over the top of the arms, and I won't be able to do that after joining these 2 assemblies together, so I knocked that out quick. I also rounded over the top of the seat front. Okay, now I join them. After getting it aligned to my marks, I pinned the back using the construction screws once again. But the front, I'm actually going to be hiding them in the rabbet of the back assembly. And this is why I left those slats off. I marked out where they would go so that I could pick out a location that would hide it behind it. I used a Forstner bit to countersink just enough for that Spax head to be sunk into the wood. Then I came back with my power lag. And this is going to pin the back assembly into the arm assembly without any of that hardware showing. After completing one side, I can flip it over and repeat on the other. And that, my friends, is an adorable chair to test out. Well, I guess I need to finish putting on the back slats. A little bit of wood glue, a few nails, and voila, a chair. For this one, I was really going for something that still had some tilt to it, but something not as sinky as an Adirondack. Personally, I think that this one is a great balance. It's comfortable, but it's not as difficult to get out of. Plus, man, does that cedar look great against this colored cushions. Now, you can certainly leave the chair as is right there. However, I did already plan on putting accented X inside of the leg assembly, so next I did that. This is a simple aesthetic add-on that's made from 1x2 material that I painted black. After building a frame, I painted everything, then added in the 2 parts to make an X. Everything here is glued and pinned together using my Senko 15 again, but an 18 would do the trick as well. At first, I was gonna align it to the front of the leg, but after looking at it, I pushed it to the center, and I think that looks really nice. I threw in 1 nail per side to hold it in place. And then I call this project done. Personally, I love the way that it came out. It not only looks great, but it also feels really comfortable and sturdy. I like how the arms are a little bit lower. I really feel like this would be great if you're a guitar player and wanting to sit and play on the porch. If you have a place that you're trying to populate with chairs this spring, then I really hope that this video has helped you out. Remember that I have a set of plans over on my website, not only for this chair, but also tons of other projects as well. And I'm gonna go ahead and get started on making another 3 to match. So I'll see you on my next video, guys.